Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the how you use percents in order to solve problems. Now, you're going to find these are similar to how we find answers to fractions problems and decimal problems, and these are usually related to finding portions. So, in this video, we're going to talk about specifically how you can find portions with fractions, and also some strategies to solve other word problems that have percents in them. So some things to remember before we get started is that fractions show portions of wholes or parts of a whole. So we talked about that in last video, how we can represent our green stars as 2 out of 5 total stars. Or we can also represent this as a decimal. Our green stars represent 0.4 of our total stars, while our red represent 0.6. Altogether, it is our one whole. If we add 0.4 plus 0.6, we're going to get one whole. That's because we're talking about all our stars together. Okay. Another thing you're going to need to remember is that fractions are division problems and fractions are also decimals. So this is just remembering that connection between fractions are decimals, decimals are percents. This is important to know because some problems, they might give you a percent and ask you to find a fraction. Some problems, they might give you a fraction and ask you to find a decimal. Some problems, they might even give you a fraction and ask you to find a percent. So knowing that connection is going to help you know which steps to take. And also percents show portions of wholes. So just like fractions show a portion of a whole, just like I can say that 2 out of my 5 are green, I can also show that that is a percent. So 40% of my stars are green. Okay, it also shows a portion. Likewise, I can say that 60% of my stars are red. 60% of my stars are red, 40% of my stars are green, and altogether, all of my stars, 60% plus 40% makes 100%. And this is just a reminder of what we talked about in the last video. Percent just simply means per 100. It's if we take our one whole, we divide it into 100. What portion of that do we have? So 25 out of 100 is the same thing as 25%. So here's the strategy for using percents to find a portion. And again, a portion just means a part of a whole. So we're going to talk about how you can use that to find parts of a whole. So our first question is 35% of 360. So 360 is our whole. How do we find 35% of 360? So it's pretty simple. All you're going to do is you're going to take your percent and you're just going to turn it into a decimal. So remember that all you do to turn a percent into a decimal is you're just going to jump it over to the left 2 spaces, or you're going to divide it by 100. And that's going to look like this. Our 35% as a decimal is 0.35. Remember that fractions are decimals, decimals are percents. These are equivalent terms. They're all the same. So we're going to turn that into a decimal. 35% is 0.35. And then we're going to turn this into a multiplication problem. The reason we're multiplying is because it's a portions problem. Portions means multiply. And also because we're finding 35% of 360. That of is signaling that we are multiplying. So we go ahead, we're going to set up our multiplication problem, 0.35 times 360, and we get as our result, as our product, 126. Now this makes sense because we know that when we multiply decimals, 0.35 times a whole number, 360, we know that our whole number is going to get smaller. And in fact, our number has gotten smaller. Okay, we can also use estimation to help us find our answer. We know that 0.35 is very close to 1/3, and we know if we find 1/3 of 360, it's around 120. In other words, if I divide it by 3, it's going to be around 120. And our answer is 126. So we know that our answer is correct. We can go back and check it. 35% of 360 is 126. So here on this slide, I've made a couple different problems. And what I'd like you to do now, boys and girls, is to pause your video, go ahead and get out a piece of scrap paper and try these problems out for yourself. So, and then afterwards, we can go over a strategy for how to solve these different problems, because these are problems that you will be seeing much more of in the future. Okay? All right, so go ahead and pause your video here. All right, so welcome back. Hopefully you've had a chance to try out these problems. If you haven't, please make sure to pause the video and try them out. The first problem is pretty straightforward. It says a tip is 20% of a meal's total cost. If a meal is $56, how much will you pay? Again, this is a portions problem. And the reason that I know that this is a portions problem, a part of a whole, is because it's saying 20% of a total, 20% of a total. So I know that the strategy that's going to work here is the strategy that we talked about. All we do is we take our percent, we're going to turn that into a decimal and then multiply times our total. Okay, so that's going to work here. We take our percent, we're going to turn it into a decimal, do 2 jumps over, 1, 2. Our decimal becomes 0.2, and we're finding 0.2 or 1/5, that's an equivalent term, 0.2 of 56, or in other words, 0.2 times 56. When we do 0.2 times 56, our resulting answer is going to be $11.20. For our next one, we're given a fraction and it's asking us to find out a percent. So we know that the strategy is we're going to need to turn our fraction into our decimal, and then we'll need to turn our decimal into a percent. So if you don't know how to do that, please go back and watch the last video to make sure how to do that. So all you're going to do is you're going to divide your 34, your dividend, by your divisor, 60. And when we do 34 divided by 60, we're getting a repeating decimal. We get 0.566666666 forever. Multiply this times 100 to create our fraction. Our percent, and we are getting 56.66 repeating percent. The question is asking us, is this a pass grade? No, it is not a pass grade, because anything greater than 60% is a pass. 56% is less than 60. This is a fail grade. Okay. Our last problem is a little bit trickier. It's asking us to look at a circle graph. You'll notice on the circle graph that we have different sports, and you'll also notice that by each sport there is a percent. This is also called a pie chart. Now it's telling us that together basketball and volleyball represent 50%, represent 50 students, not percent, represents 50 students. So how many kids were surveyed? So it's asking us all together, how many kids were surveyed? Okay, so let's think about that for a sec, and let's think about a strategy for how we might be able to solve this type of problem. Well, we know that 22% is our basketball, and we know that 18% is our volleyball. We know that together 22% plus 18% is equal to 40%. So we know that 40% of all of our students, however many that is, we know that 40% of those students is equal to 50 students, okay? 40% of our unknown amount is 50 students. So the strategy is we're going to go ahead and represent our unknown as the students. We're going to set it up as 40% of our unknown is equal to 50, and then we're just going to solve for that. If you're not sure how to do that, you could guess and check. You could plug in any value for S and see what you come out with. If you remember algebra, you can simply divide 50 by 40%.